Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to break down a really fascinating text that completely reframes the ideas of Christ and Antichrist, not as some figures out there in the world, but as powerful identities that are at war inside every single one of us. So let's just start with the central question that turns this whole idea on its head. It's a challenge, really, to stop looking outward and start looking inward at some of these ancient concepts in a way that's deeply, deeply personal. So here's how we're going to unpack all of this. We'll start with this fundamental idea of a divided self. Then we'll explore each of those identities, look at how they clash, and finally check out the path toward bringing them together in what the text calls an awakening. Okay, let's start at the very beginning, the foundation of this whole thing. According to this source material, our sense of who we are isn't this single solid thing. Nope. The idea is that it's actually created by two totally distinct types of consciousness. And everything, I mean everything in this theory hinges on this split. On one side, you've got sensual consciousness. That's just what you experience directly through your senses, seeing, hearing, tasting, all of it. And on the other side, you've got rational consciousness, which is everything you've learned from your family, your culture, society, all the stuff you've been taught. So, here is the kicker. These aren't just, different ways of thinking. The source argues that they actively build two competing selves inside of us. Each one has its own origin, its own agenda, its own way of seeing the world. All right, let's dive into that first identity, the one that's formed from our earliest, most direct, raw experiences. And the source material gives it a name that's, well, pretty provocative: the Antichrist. Now hold on, because it's super important to clarify this. In this context, Antichrist does not mean some figure of evil, not at all. The source uses it as a kind of technical term for the self that is built purely from sensory input. This is our primal, physical identity. It's the self that only knows the world through what it can see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. And what's so fascinating here is how this identity is framed. It's not something to be afraid of or to destroy. It's presented as the natural first step of being human. It's our base self, our foundation, the platform that everything else is eventually going to be built on. Okay, so that's our first self. But as we grow up and start interacting with the world, a second identity starts to form. This is the self we are taught to be, and the source calls this the Christ identity. See, this identity isn't shaped by our direct senses. It's constructed from all the ideas, the rules, the expectations, and the systems that we just absorb from the world around us. You could almost say it's the you that society helps build. And this just lays it out perfectly, right? You can see exactly where this rational self comes from. It's forged by our family, our community, the culture we grow up in, our education system, and the laws we have to follow. It's basically our social programming, the mental framework we use to fit in. So, what happens when you've got these two fundamentally different identities? One that's all primal and instinctual, and another that's all learned and rational, trying to live in the same person? Well, you get conflict. A war breaks out. And the text describes this as an inevitable internal battle. The learned, rational self, the Christ identity, is constantly trying to control and suppress the primal, sensual self, the Antichrist identity. I mean, think about it. It's that classic struggle between what you want to do versus what you feel you should do. We all know that feeling. And according to this text, our rational, socially conditioned self, it usually wins these little inner battles. The rules of society and our own learned logic often manage to overpower our more instinctual desires. But this constant conflict, that's not the end of the story. The source proposes a path to actually move beyond this duality, a process that it calls the Great Awakening. And this right here is the absolute game changer. The awakening begins with this one critical realization. Both of these selves, the sensual one and the rational one, are based on a limited relative truth. They're both shaped by this mortal world, and neither one has the whole picture. The source even has a very specific name for us when we're in this pre-awakened state. It calls this identity, the one that's still trapped in this inner conflict and living by these limited relative truths, the Son of God. So you see, the awakening isn't about one identity finally defeating the other. Not at all. It's about both of them finally stopping the fight, looking up and recognizing a higher, more absolute truth that exists beyond them both. It's a total shift in perspective.
And when that awakening happens, the war is over. The conflict just stops. A new, whole, integrated identity is born. And the text gives this unified self a simple but really powerful name: man.
All right, so let's look at this final state of being. This is the ultimate goal of this entire internal journey, what the source calls becoming the Son of Man. The text wraps up with this really profound statement. The Son of Man isn't just another identity. It represents the fully awakened human. It's the self that has moved beyond that inner war of relative truths and now reflects a much higher, more absolute understanding of reality. And all of this leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought to chew on. If our very sense of self is a story we build from these two competing forces, our raw experiences on one hand and our social conditioning on the other, it's worth asking yourself, what story are you building right now?